Hello and welcome to our latest video. Today we're going to be focusing on tips to survive the torturous querying process. So the reason for this video coming at this particular time is that the Write Mentor Agent Showcase is coming up, and many of the people who are part of the programme will be submitting their work to agents following this. The hope is obviously some of them manage to sign up with an agent as part of the programme, but the realistic situation is that most of them won't, and therefore they'll be querying for the first time on their own after that. As we all know, querying is a particularly stressful, particularly difficult time. It requires a lot of patience, it requires a lot of resilience, it requires a lot of getting your mind in a different place in order to get through it and to stop that constant refresh click of your emails that we all do. I did it every single time. As much as the advice I'm going to give you today is contradictory to that, it's what we inevitably do as humans, and I'm going to try and give you some tips to avoid that. But human nature is that we will obsess about this and we will check it over so many times, and I'll also maybe try and be realistic with my advice as well as helpful at the same time. So tip 1 is the classic bit of advice that you get when you go on querying to agents or on submission to publishers, which is to get on with the next book, go on with something different, do something which breaks you out of that cycle of continuous thought about your story. You have probably spent years totally focused in that world and producing the best book that you can before querying, so your mind is very much fixed in there, and if you let it can totally consume all of your thoughts, take over your work life, your family life and so on. So the key is to get out of there if you can, and writing something new or come up with a new idea, or actually getting away from writing altogether and taking up a new hobby or an old hobby that you've let slip because of your writing or whatever it might be. Spend more time with your family, spend more time at work. You can do all of these things to get away from it. So I guess tip number 1 is to step away if you can and try and work on something new. Tip 2, now this is my own personal tip, it's not a industry approved tip, or it's not like going to work for everyone, but I found when I was querying agents that the least mentally stressful way to do it was to query several agents at the same time. Not just one or two, but several in big bunches. Because although there's often that standard advice where you should query one or two at a time in case you get any feedback which you can then implement, so you can then query again with an improved manuscript, my experience is that I've never received enough detailed feedback to make a significant difference to my book that I would then improve it for a future query. So while loads of agents were personalised and complimentary and so on in their rejections to me, no one ever said specifically, here's a developmental edit and here's a letter which states exactly how you can improve this. It's always very general, and that's understandable, of course, because they have so little time that they simply can't give feedback to those that they're going to reject. So I don't really hold a lot of value in that whole only query one or two agents at a time. In my experience, when I've queried en masse, which I did with my later books, I had far more responses, far more success than I did in my earlier books where I went one or two at a time. And that's probably because the books that I wrote later on were better, but I still think that's in terms of your mental health, that is a better way to approach it, because you're just spending less time waiting. You're going to get more responses in a shorter period of time, which is good for you in terms of not having those long periods of silence. And I just overall, in terms of mental headspace, was better when I approached it in that way. So tip 2, query en masse in large bunches. Don't query individual agents one or two at a time. Tip 3, do your research. You may well have only done minimal research when initially querying the agent, and I suggest you actually do a lot more than that, but I understand time and life and so on get in the way, and you can't spend several hours on every agent. So therefore, So while you're waiting, that's a good use of your time, is to be researching agents, find out more about them, go into Publishers Marketplace, look at the number of sales that they've done over the last couple of years, look at the kinds of deals that they've done, who they have sold the books to, which publishers. Is that along the right lines in which you envisaged your book being sold to? Do they represent other people who write similar things to you? Do they have a good reputation within the community? And it's very easy to find these things out nowadays. Obviously Twitter's a big talking place for the writing community, but there's other ways as well. There's also Query Tracker, of course, which you can use to help measure the average response times for particular agents, or there tends to be like a queue system on there. It's obviously authors putting it in themselves, but there's like a queuing system, and you can see roughly when agents are responding to and either rejecting or requesting different submissions on the timeline there, which is great. It can help put your mind at ease to think, oh, actually, well, they're still like a month behind on their submission, so I'm not going to worry too much about them. Or you can say, oh, actually, they have rejected something which came in after mine, so that means they might be considering mine. And actually, those are dangerous mind games to get into, to be honest, because often when you daydream and imagine that these things are the case, they're not necessarily always. So, but yeah, Query Tracker is great for keeping an eye on these things and just giving yourself realistic expectations of the time frames in which you think you're going to hear a response. So tip 3, research your agents, go into Query Tracker, Publishers Marketplace, all different places, find out a little bit more about them, particularly if you get a request. So tip 4, relating to requests which I've just mentioned. If you do get a request, many agencies ask for you to inform them of that so that they know that another agent is looking at the full manuscript. If you do so, it might encourage them to speed up a little bit. Not always. They are still very busy, and priority obviously goes with their current clients, but they will, I think, in my experience, be more likely to read your manuscript quicker, your query quicker, if you have told them that you've got a full request. So I would let them know. My experience, as I say, is that generally causes them to say, quick email back saying, oh great, thanks for letting me know, I'll get onto this as soon as I can, or something similar. Okay. What I wouldn't do is to tell them every time you get a full request, for example, because, well, they know once you get one that they want to be speeding up. If you keep hounding them with it, they might start thinking, well, actually, is this the kind of person I want to represent? You know, they're not respecting the sort of professional boundaries of these things. I said on my website that it'd be 8 weeks for a response, and they've sent me 4 emails within the first 3 or 4 weeks. You know, that kind of thing is not particularly regarded as professional behaviour, and you want to seem professional. You want that agent to think you're a professional author, someone who they can represent, and you will behave in a way that is befitting of someone who is going to be a professional within the industry and is going to be a role model, and someone who young children, if you're writing middle grade or YA novels, you will be a role model to them, and you'll act professionally. So that's something just to bear in mind as well. Tip 5 relates to if you get an offer. Now, if you get an offer, this is where the clock starts to speed up a little bit, because generally speaking, if an agent gives you an offer, they are not then going to be willing to wait forever. Okay, and I've actually seen in Twitter recently agents who have said, and I don't know if this is the general standard, but who have said, actually, I don't mind how long I wait, because I'd rather you made the right decision and so on. And that's brilliant that they're saying that. However, you obviously want to extend professional courtesy as well, and you don't want to be saying, oh, actually, after 6 or 8 weeks, oh, I'm still not sure. You want to still, you know, make that agent feel like, yeah, I wanted to be with you, now that you give me the offer, I do want to sign it. However, you should give yourself that extra few weeks so that you can get in touch with those who still have the manuscript and allow them, if they want to make a counter offer and to say, yes, actually, I also want to represent you, and here's the reasons why I should be the one that's your agent. And whilst most of the time agents will say something like, oh, sorry, I don't have the time over the next 2 weeks to read the full manuscript, so sadly I'll have to step aside, or something similar, you'll find that others will quickly read through the manuscript and see if it is going to be something for them. And again, that totally speeds up the timeline at this point. And you usually get, I think the industry standards guidelines are you give them 2 to 3 weeks before you give a firm yes or no to the agent who has offered to you. Okay, and again, this is at this point you'd want to be doing your research extremely thoroughly, because there's been some whispers recently of agents who have been a bit untoward. So you want to be checking that all of your clients are happy with being with that agent as well before you sign. Now, one last tip that I'd give you is, before you sign, speak to at least 2 authors that are represented by that agent, ideally more, but at least 2. And you want to get different perspectives. So you want to get the perspective of someone who has signed with that agent and who now has been published, i.e. they've sold their book and everything has gone well. But you also want to get that contrasting perspective, which is from someone who has signed with that agent but hasn't necessarily got a deal. They might have been on submission for 6 months, a year, or they've given up on that book, and maybe they're going on to something else. Because you want that perspective, because you want to know how you're going to be treated in all eventualities. And being realistic about it, you probably got a high chance of not selling that first book. Getting an agent is the first step, but getting a publisher seems just as difficult, if not more difficult, than getting that initial agent. So something to bear in mind before you sign with them is to make sure that you get both of those perspectives, so that you're happy with how you'd be treated whether you get a deal or whether you don't. Because at the end of the day, you've got to look after yourself in these relationships. I know a few people who have been with agents and it's not worked out for whatever reason, and it is a tough place to go to after that. So make sure you make the right decision in the first place. I know when I signed with my agent, or just before I signed with my agent, I must have asked about 15-20 questions. Got really involved, asked about, you know, everything to do with the agency, with my agent herself, with everything that we've been planning and so on. So don't be afraid to ask those questions. They're more than happy to answer them, particularly if they are legit and confident with what they're doing and what they plan for you as well. So totally ask all the questions that you have to. So that's it. Top 5 tips for surviving the querying process. I hope that they've been helpful to you, and I'll finish by saying good luck and may the force be with you.